Hi, everyone. I just wanted to let you know we're going to be starting at 6 p.m. For right now, I'm just going to let everybody come on into the live room and be able to see the video. So if you'll just hang tight with us, John and Roberta will be coming in at 6 p.m. So thank you. All right, John.
Welcome to DLLT's Invasive Milfoil, What Does It Mean for Big Lake broadcast in collaboration with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection and Lake Stewards of Maine. A little bit about the Downeast Lakes Land Trust. We contribute to the long-term economic and environmental well-being of the Downeast Lakes region through the conservation and exemplary management of our forests and waters. This includes our 56,000 acre community forest, which is open to the public year-round. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi, everyone. Just a few housekeeping things before we start. John McPhedran of the Department of Environmental Protection and Roberta Hill from Lake Stewards of Maine will be joining us in a few minutes. But before they do, if you have any questions during the presentation, just type them in the chat box and we're going to keep up with them and they'll be asked at the end of the presentation, and we're going to try to make sure that we don't duplicate questions that way. For us to gauge where you're coming from and where you're viewing the presentation from, if you would, in the chat box right now, go ahead and tell us where you're viewing the presentation from including the township and the state. And if you're not comfortable sharing that information, that's fine. But we want to try to keep up with as many people as possible just to ensure that the presentation is getting to those who need to see it. And last but not least, if you need to leave during the presentation, that's fine. The video will be recorded and it'll be available on our website, our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel. So we're just going to give everybody a few minutes to go ahead and get into the live. And if you can, go ahead and drop where you're from, including the township and state, in the chat box for me. Hi, Susie. It's nice to meet you. Hi, Lizzie. Thank you. Paul, wow, from Canada or California. I'm not sure which one, but thank you for joining us, Paul. So if you're just now joining us, I'll just go ahead and repeat just a few housekeeping things. We're going to save all the questions till the end. If you have a question, go ahead and type them in the comment box, and we'll take those and we'll read them off at the end. If you would, so that we can keep up with where you're from, leave the township and state that you're from in the comment box as well. Hi, Bob and Sandy. Hi, Paul. Hi, Kenny. Hi, Rochelle and Steven. Thanks for joining us. Okay, Paul, that is California, not Canada. Thank you. Okay, so the presentation is going to last about an hour. Again, if you have any comments, drop those in the comment box. If you have any questions, drop those in the chat box at the bottom of the video. We'll save all those till the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring in John McPhedran from the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, and he has a presentation that he's going to share with you. And when John is done, we'll go ahead and bring in Roberta. So without further ado, here's John.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Well, I'll try again. Let me know if you can hear me. Yes, you can hear me. Okay, I will proceed. We've got texts coming from Lillian that she can or can't hear me, so I will proceed because I just got one that says she can hear me. My name is John McPhedran with the Department of Environmental Protection. Karen Hannell and Denise Blanchette work with me out of Augusta on the Invasive Aquatic Species Program. We are based in Augusta, but support programs around the state. This photograph on this cover slide is of Lake Arrowhead in southwest Maine. It is the same species of milfoil that was found in Big Lake last year. It has a distinctive stalk that sticks up above the water. I want to talk a little bit about the invasive species program, talk about what we know about the Big Lake infestation thus far, and get back to some broader program aspects for you. The program is funded by the sale of Maine watercraft registrations. So these are motorized watercraft that operate on inland waters, and also any motorized watercraft from out of state that comes into Maine must display a separate sticker. The fee is $15. It was increased from 10 to 15 for Maine registered watercraft, increased by the legislature in the last regular session. And the fee for out-of-state registered boats went from $20 to $35. That $35 fee gets another bump in 2 years to $45. Again, that was legislative change made recently. This is the first year with the higher fees. 80% of the revenue comes to our Department of Environmental Protection, and 20% goes to Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. We have 3 legs to our stool of invasive aquatic species work. The first is to prevent whenever possible through courtesy boat inspections. Courtesy boat inspections occur over many parts of the state. They are voluntary. They are not mandatory. But we find plants and every year coming into Maine waters. The second leg of our stool is early detection, which is done by training volunteers to be able to distinguish native plants from invasive plants so that these plants can be discovered early in their growth cycle before they take over a water body. And then the third leg is the response. Rapid response is when we have a new infestation that is isolated to a small part of a water body and there's a possibility for eradication. If a plant is well established in a water body, eradication is very difficult, and the likelihood is that the lake association is going to be in for a long period of management to try to minimize the impacts of this invasive plant. This map shows the known distribution of invasive plants in the state. We had several recent new infestations. One was Cobbossee Lake in Manchester and Winthrop with Eurasian water milfoil, which is only found in a few places in the state. We also had another milfoil, the same one that's in Big Lake, and a second invasive plant in the Kennebec River. But we've also had some successes in eradicating some infestations in a few cases. These were especially when the plant was new to the water body, not well established. But obviously what's evident by this map is the fact that most of the infestations are in the southwest corner of the state, and then you have this huge gap to Big Lake. It's not to say there aren't other infestations in between. We hope there aren't. There may be, but it is worrying for sure that we have an invasive aquatic plant in interior Washington County, and it presents a threat to spread to other lakes in the area. After Warden Richard in the lower left here found the plant and sent it to Roberta Hill at the Lake Stewards of Maine, which is formerly known as the Maine Volunteer Lake Monitoring Program. The DEP and Roberta, who's in the lower right of that slide, joined with Brad and with Joe Musante from the Passamaquoddy tribe to survey an area of Clifford Bay where Joe had found where Warden Richard had found the plant. This is a sample of the plant in the lower left from Big Lake. Milfoils can be difficult to identify to species. We have 6 different species of milfoils in the state. 5 of them look rather similar. And often you need a flower stalk, which you see in that lower left part of the picture, to identify it. We saw the flower stalk, the distinctive flower stalk of variable water milfoil, which was disappointing, but we also sent it to a scientist at St. Joseph's College in Windham, who confirmed using genetic analysis that it is variable leaf water milfoil. This plant is native to parts of the United States, but not to the Northeast. With Joe and Brad's help, we surveyed a corner of Big Lake, the Clifford Bay area where Brad had initially, Warden Richard had initially found the plant in this area near Brittany Island. That's where we started our survey, hoping to find maybe just a couple of plants, a couple small patches that we could come up with a dive team and remove. But that was not the case. Again, this is a photograph from that part of Clifford Bay and Big Lake, showing the growths, the fronds, the long fronds with the bottle brush tips of variable water milfoil. And ignore the blue straight lines, but notice the WPT, the waypoints. These are points collected with the Global Positioning System Unit, and each of those points marks a plant or an area of plant growth. This image does not show all of the points that were marked that day, because to the west, toward where Clifford Stream comes in, we also found plants. And thanks to Brad Richard, he put together this image showing approximate boundaries of variable milfoil growth, as he's labeled them: the Clifford Stream area, Brittany Island area, and the Scott Brook area. This is what we know, what we've documented thus far. In the Clifford Stream area especially, we saw large, dense patches of variable water milfoil, many of which had these flower stalks sticking above the water. It was late season, so a lot of the plant was starting to decay, but it was obvious that there are large patches there. Zooming out a little bit, we see the 3 areas that Brad outlined in red at the bottom of the image, and we're looking at the rest of Big Lake and Long Lake and Louie Lake. There is a great deal of other area to survey for this plant to see if it's confined to this part of the lake or if it's growing elsewhere. Roberta will probably talk a little bit about that, because prior to the pandemic, there was a plan that she was orchestrating to have much of this area surveyed this summer. But that is not going to happen. We provided to Warden Richard some buoys. These are, on the left you can see, they say avoid milfoil area. These are not regulatory buoys. They do not have the same power of one of the buoys that say keep out or don't go here. These are strictly advisory buoys to inform the boater that there is a milfoil infestation in the area, and with the hope that they maybe will avoid the area or take special care to trim up their motor to prevent or reduce the likelihood of fragmenting milfoil. That is one of the key ways, and probably for this plant, the key way that it is moved around, by a fragment flowing to another part of the lake, getting established landing at the bottom of the lake, and potentially rooting a new plant. I'm going to switch gears for the second half of my talk to talk a little bit about native plants and the importance of native plants, and also the rest of the state program. And as Lillian said, we'll be glad to take questions at the end. Native plants, think of it as a kind of a forest system where you have a canopy and an understory and a mid layer. They provide habitat for our organisms in the water body, protect water quality, enhance the diversity, and they take up areas that may otherwise be occupied by invasive plants. Having a diverse assemblage of native plants is an excellent defense. It doesn't mean that native plants won't become established, but it inhibits the ability of the invasive plants to become established when you have a diverse growth of native plants. Invasive plants tend to be strong competitors. They will occupy an open space and are very well adapted to different types of substrate. We see them growing on cobbly bottoms, in gravel, but also in muck and many different substrates. They will do just fine. And I said that this plant came from the U.S., but not this part of the U.S. And the other listed invasive plants in the state all came from Eurasia, and they've come from places where typically the checks on their growth there we do not have here. We may not have the particular insect that would feed on variable milfoil, for example. These are the 11 plants that are banned in state law, and the ones in bold are ones that we've already found in the state. One of them, yellow floating heart, is only growing in a couple of what I would call water gardens in the front lawns. They're not in public waters. The other plants that we found in the state are all in one or more public water. Variable milfoil, the one at the top, is by far the most common invasive plant in the state. Hydrilla is known from a few water bodies, and I'll actually skip back to the map so you can now look at this and see the yellow squares are the variable milfoil locations. You can see again that that's by far the most prevalent plant in the state. We have several curly leaf pondweed, several hydrilla, a couple of brittle water nymph, and we have a few cases with 2 or actually even 3 invasive aquatic plants in the state. But we, as discouraging as it is to find this plant in the state in Big Lake, we need to remember that there are other, for one, invasive plants, but there are other invasive organisms that are a threat to Big Lake and other water bodies throughout the state of Maine. And there is reason to continue to work hard to protect the spread of these organisms. One is the zebra mussel and the quagga mussel. I'm sorry, they're two different organisms, but these mussels are, I have some experience from zebra mussel being in Lake Champlain, where they clog water intakes and they'll be all over the bottom of the lake. And these are potential threats to our state. Now, on one hand, we're fortunate to have water chemistry that is not conducive to their establishment, but there also is some evidence that zebra and quagga mussels may have the ability to accommodate different water chemistries than they currently do. Asian clam is another threat that has been found in Lake Champlain and also in Lake George in New York. And the spiny water flea is a zooplankton that lives out in the open water, and it's in Lake Champlain. It can cause a real problem with fishing lines and clogging lines. Again, these are just a few of the examples of some of the non-native organisms that we don't yet have in the state that we really need to work to prevent them from becoming established. One of the major ways we do that is through annual courtesy boat inspections. They emphasize courtesy. They are not required by law, but we have strong working relationships with many groups in the state that get grants from the DEP, from the Department of Environmental Protection, but also match the grant money with their own funding and a lot of effort, so that we've had a consistent string of over 80,000 inspections for a number of years. And each year, boat inspectors find plants and sometimes other organisms that are attached to boats before they launch in the state. So, as I talked earlier in the talk, this is our first line of defense, the boat inspections. We've talked with Downeast Lakes Land Trust and we are providing some grant funding to get started with courtesy boat inspections in 2020. We collect data, and one of the pieces of data that we collect is what we call the last lake visited. When we see a boat at a particular water body, we want to ask, where were you last? And this diagram shows that we get a lot of boats from all over New England, but also even farther, and also from New Brunswick. From this particular data set had about 1,000 boats that came from out of state. And of those, 60% of them were from water bodies that were known to have an infestation of an invasive aquatic plant or one of these critters that I talked to you about. Again, about 60% of the boats coming from out of state are from an infested water body. In 2018, we had particular noteworthy catches. These are saves by inspectors. These are instances where a boat inspector inspects a boat and finds an invasive organism on it before it enters a main water body. These 4 were Eurasian water milfoil, and they came from Connecticut, Vermont, St. Lawrence River, and actually as far away as Lake Mendota in Wisconsin. The Lake Mendota plant was a little dried up, not in great shape. It was in the wheel well of a trailer, but it was in good enough shape that we could identify it as Eurasian water milfoil. Previously, I said that milfoils can be hard to identify the species, and that's true. But Eurasian water milfoil, once you've seen it a few times, it has a unique look to it, and it's got unique characters that you can use. The number of leaflets on a leaf, and it's different than the other species. My colleague, Karen Hannell, she was looking more closely at the sample of Eurasian water milfoil that came from the St. Lawrence River, and zoomed in and noticed a very small zebra mussel attached to that plant from the St. Lawrence River. So here we have a situation where we have an invasive plant coming in with a hitchhiker. This plant was going into Pennsylvania Lake in Norway, which, like much of the state, does not have chemistry that's conducive to its growth. So that's a good thing, but it still is a threat and a risk to our water bodies. In closing, what we're doing is emphasizing more and more, not just a boat inspection, but the clean, drain, dry mantra. You clean anything from your boat, any visible plant, dirt, obviously any organisms that might be attached to it, and dispose of it. Also, do not release any live bait. We ask inspectors to urge boaters to drain live wells and bilge plugs after they remove their boat from the water and before overland transport. There was a bill in the legislature to require that happen. It did not pass, did not come out of committee. I'm hopeful that there will be another effort to require draining of live wells and bilges. And finally, ideally, your boat and equipment dries for several days, ideally 5 days. We know that's not realistic for many people, but we dry as much as we can before we go into another water body. I'll be glad to answer questions after Roberta's presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, John. I'm going to go ahead and bring Roberta in, and she's going to do her part of the presentation. And then, as John said, we're going to take questions at the end. I have been recording people's questions, so thank you for participating. And we will get those as soon as Roberta is done with her part of the presentation. So without further ado, here's Roberta Hill of the Lake Stewards of Maine. Hi, Roberta.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining this call. Let me just get the slideshow going. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the organization that I work for. For those of you, especially those of you who are out of state who may not have ever heard of us, the Lake Stewards of Maine has been around since 1971. Keeping an eye on the health of Maine lakes. Our mission, like many lake conservation organizations, and we have quite a few in this state, is to protect Maine lakes. But we do it in a somewhat unique way through engaging citizens in who participate in the gathering and the dissemination of credible scientific information pertaining to lake health. So these are lake or citizen lake scientists, we like to call them. And we've had a citizen lake science program going here in Maine since 1971. So we are the oldest and one of the largest statewide citizen monitoring programs in the United States. We provide technical support and training to thousands of volunteer citizen scientists across the state. And we now have what we identify as our certified citizen lake scientists. These are individuals who have gone through a more rigorous training and keep their certification up to date over time. And we have over 1,200 of those folks monitoring more than 500 lakes in Maine. And the Lake Stewards of Maine is the primary collector of statewide lake data. So that's something that Maine can be very proud of. And so my part of the talk is going to be on getting a little more into the identification of the variable milfoil in particular. As John said, we have several invasive milfoils that we are on the watch for, but we also have native milfoils. And so they're a pretty complicated group, but there are some simple things that you can just get in your minds right now that will help you to know that you've got something suspicious if you should come across a variable milfoil in Big Lake. And then I'm going to put a plug in for you coming back and getting some additional training. Because if you're out there with your eyes on the water in Big Lake, you might as well have your eyes trained to know some of these other invasives that John had mentioned in his talk, because that's really how we're going to keep our lakes pristine over time here in Maine, is really by people participating in this vigilance. So the work that you'll be doing will take place in what's known as the littoral zone of our lakes. And the littoral zone is the part of the lake where the sun penetrates to the bottom and rooted aquatic plants grow. That's the definition of the littoral zone. And it is often called the fertile fringe of our lakes and ponds and rivers, because it is where the biological action is most intense, where the species diversity is greatest. It provides habitat for creatures at various points in their life cycles, and of course it provides habitat for creatures who live around the lake as well. So it's very vibrant, very important, and very full of wonders. And so if you get into this work of looking for invasive plants, Hopefully you don't encounter too many of them, and that's would be a good thing. But if along the way you're going to witness some amazing things, and so part of what carries our volunteers forward, I think, is this just this ability to keep learning. There's just endless phenomena to explore and to learn about in the littoral zones. So welcome to the littoral zones. In order to identify the milfoil, and you've already gotten some looks at it, it's important to look at the plant structure. And initially, when you meet a plant for the first time, it's a good idea to get the overall wholeness of the plant in your mind. Is it single stems with leaves on them, or are the stems branching? Are the leaves fine and kind of feathery, or are they solid and blade shaped? The color, the height of the plant. A lot of that information, a lot of that identity of the plant that you're taking in when you're looking at the overall plant, the gestalt of the plant, can change from plant to plant, from population to population, from time of year to time of year. But it's just good to start building a repertoire of these images in your mind, so you'll know that plant when you might see it in various under various conditions and at various times of year. So take in the gestalt first, then you're starting to get into the particulars. The first thing to note is how the leaves are arranged on the stems. If the leaves are on stems, then you want to know how they're arranged. Opposite leaf arrangement is very simple. Two leaves opposing each other on the stem, and that could happen repeatedly up the stem. But the two leaves are emerging from a single point on the stem, which is known as the node. The node is where the leaves emerge, and so two leaves emerging from a single node. With an alternate leaf arrangement, the leaves are each emerging from their own node in an alternating pattern, and sometimes it's back and forth in a very two-dimensional way, but sometimes they also kind of wind around and rotate around the stem somewhat, and that's still considered an alternate leaf pattern. And then a whorled leaf arrangement is when three or more stems are all emerging from a single node, like spokes from a wheel. So you've got three or more, and in this case, we have 6 leaves per whorl, but counting the number of leaves per whorl can give you additional information. As John mentioned, the Eurasian milfoil earlier has some characteristics that are very easy to identify once you've seen it a couple of times, and one of them is that it almost always has 4 leaves per whorl. It's a very consistent whorl pattern. So that's another thing to look at. Also, the space between the whorls can give you additional information. In this case, with the image on the right-hand side, there's quite a lot of space between these two nodes. That's called internodal space, and so there's quite a bit here, but they can also be very tightly packed along the stem. And so that's also good information when you're trying to identify something. The S fell off of that somehow, but that's, I should say, leaf characteristics. And some aquatic plants have entire leaves, meaning that they look like a typical leaf with a nice smooth margin. The names of the shapes of the leaves is pretty intuitive. An elliptical leaf is somewhat egg-shaped with a more rounded base and a more pointed tip. A heart-shaped leaf obviously looks like a heart. These are lance. This is a lance-shaped or blade-shaped leaf. And you can see that also the outside of margin can be jagged, and which you might call it toothed or serrated. With some of the invasive plants and some of our native aquatic plants, those serrations can be very tiny. And so even the size of the serration can provide you with more information. But here we are getting into milfoil territory. This is the type of leaf that all leafy milfoils have. And it's a finely divided leaf, meaning that the leaf has a central midrib, generally, It doesn't have to be central. It's a kind of a midrib. And then there are leaflets coming off of the midribs. Sometimes they branch like this one. And in this case, they're all coming off of the central midrib. So that's a finely divided leaf. It kind of looks like a leaf like this, that somebody came along and ate all the fleshy parts of the leaf away, leaving only the vein pattern. And that kind of leaf is very beneficial to submersed plants who have a challenge of exchanging gas, oxygen and CO2 underwater. So they do what they can to maximize surface area. And this is one way to maximize surface area, is basically to have pretty much everything about the leaf being surface area. And also they're very flexible, which helps them to move around in any light current in the water, again, to help with gas exchange. So leaves can be divided, finely divided in various ways. This is a fork divided leaf, and these are just a couple of fork divided leaves emerging from a whorl where we've just got a segment of it showing. And so the leaf forks once, it forks twice, it forks another time, but that's basically a fork divided leaf. And then if there's a lot of branching going on, much more than over here, like the leaf looks like a full-grown deciduous tree in the wintertime, then that's usually referred to as a branch divided leaf. And there's a bit of wiggle room, a bit of gray area between these two. It's not really critical for identifying the 11 aquatic invaders that we're concerned about, but this, just to know that this forked term is used with less of the branching, the branch divided with more branching. But neither one is a milfoil. I can say that with definitively, because all leafy milfoils have this divided leaf pattern. And actually, John, I'm getting a call from Karen Hannell, your colleague, and I don't know if that means that something's wrong, and I don't know if I should pick up, and I don't know if I should stop this. So if there is something wrong, can somebody else give me a heads up? I'm not going to take the call from Karen, but
Hi, Roberta. Sorry, I was trying to get your attention and text you, but they can't see your pictures. So if you will reshare your pictures, I'm really sorry. They could see you talking and they could hear you. And I tried telling you, but I guess it wasn't working. I tried calling you as well.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
so maybe we can make the pictures available afterwards as well.
Well, let me just try. Where are you? Oh, goodness, that's going to be really hard for you guys. I don't know how. Are you sharing my screen right now?
Can you share it with me again, please? Yep,
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, now hang on. Can you see that? I'm going to quickly go through the pictures that you missed. Can you all see it now? Can you come back on, Lillian, and let me know?
Yes, they can see it now.
Okay, great. I'm very sorry about that, everyone. First time on Be Live, Facebook Live, so I might have messed up there. Anyway, this is what you've missed. There's the Littoral Zone pictures that I had. I wanted you to see those. Those are some of the wonders. And here's the plant structure: opposite leaf arrangement, alternate leaf arrangement, a whorl of leaves, an entire leaf, a serrated leaf, the finely divided leaves. And now you can see the fork divided leaf, the branch divided leaf, and the feather divided leaf. So I hope that makes a lot more sense to you than it did before. And again, this is the really important message here. And if you don't remember anything else from this talk, please remember this. All leafy milfoils have feather divided leaves. And all aquatic plants that have true feather divided leaves, leaves that have a central midrib, and the leaflets they're somewhat paired up. They don't always match up perfectly, but somewhat symmetrically on both sides of the leaf, the tiny leaflet, hair-like leaflets coming off. then if you have a plant that has that characteristic, you have a milfoil. And just to reiterate what John said again, it may not be the invasive variable milfoil. It might be one of our native milfoils. We do not know too much about the native plants on Big Lake yet, so it's possible that you also have some native species there. But if you do find this, you have automatically found a suspicious plant, and you need to, we'll describe what to do when you find one in just a moment. So here's some different feather divided leaves. And as John mentioned, counting the leaflet pairs can be helpful in some instances. If you get over 11 or 12, to count pairs, you just go up one side of the leaf, figuring that they're pairs, so you're good. So 2, 4, 6, 8 leaflet pairs on this leaf on the right. And here on the left, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. As soon as you get above 12 leaflet pairs, you get suspicious of Eurasian milfoil, but variable milfoil can have anywhere between 8 and 11, maybe sometimes 12. So that can be helpful. And now here is variable milfoil. Its Latin name is Myriophyllum heterophyllum. Myriophyllum is the genus name, so all the milfoils begin with that part of the name. And then the heterophyllum, hetero, many, phylum, the leaf type, many leaf types is kind of its name. So variable water milfoil. And it does have 2 distinct leaf types. So it has these feather divided leaves on the submersed part of the stem. And if you see it early in the season, that's what you're going to see. These flower spikes don't emerge until generally, I mean, the earliest we've seen here in southern Maine is in like late June. But up there, I imagine it will be later in the season that the emergent flowers would emerge. So this might be the only part of the plant that you see, this bottle brushy part that is the submersed part of the plant. But you can see that the feather divided leaves are arranged in whorls, and you can have anywhere between 4 and 6 leaves per whorl with variable milfoil. So again, counting leaves per whorl can tell you whether you're in that range. And you can count the leaflet pairs. So I'll just do it to one of these leaves here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There's 12 there. So that just tops out at about its maximum number of leaflet pairs. And then you can see on the picture on the right, the darker picture, that picture was taken actually in Sebago Lake, or the Songo River that empties into Sebago Lake, early in the season, or pretty early in the season, let's say maybe July or so, before it had emerged to the surface completely. And there's no emergent flower stems there yet. But what I like about this photo is you can see the milfoil's classic shape of the fronds. John mentioned fronds. That's what they're referred to, a long stem. There can be branching along the stem, but the whole thing comes up as a cylinder, and then as it gets close to the growing tip, it kind of, this whorls get smaller and smaller and smaller, which make it look kind of like a rocket ship, coming to a nose cone on the rocket ship. Some people call it a foxtail look, and that's another good description. You can also notice this reddish stem. Not all variable milfoil populations have that red stem. Some have just a greenish stem. But if you do see the red stem and the olive colored leaves, that's another clue to you. The emergent flower, as I said, emerges once the plant starts maturing. And the leaves that attend the flowers, they are photosynthesizing leaves, but they're also kind of, as the plant is developing, protection for the flowers. Those are blade-shaped and serrated. And so not at all finely divided, not feather divided. They're blade-shaped and serrated. And as John mentioned, that is critical for knowing whether we've got variable milfoil or not, is having that emergent flower stem, because there are other native milfoils that are a dead ringer for this plant before the flowers form. Here's just an up-close illustration of the flower stem showing you those bracts that attend the flowers, and you can't even see any flowers there, and that's really pretty much how it is. The flowers are so tiny. There's a little white flower, if you can see it on this image. There's another little tiny white flower, but they're very small relative to the size of the bracts. And the bracts can be reddish, they can be green, they can flop over in the water. So it's kind of a mess out there, but just know that it's a very different leaf type above the water than below. And one other little note to file is that if variable milfoil is washed ashore, even the fragments are washed ashore, or the lake level drops and the plants are stranded, they can form these little terrestrial plants that will just maintain their terrestrial status until the water comes back, and which time they will morph back into aquatic plants. And all of the 11 aquatic invaders that we're concerned about here in Maine have these incredible strategies for survival. That's what makes them such incredible survivors. Added to that, the fact that they're from away and they don't have any natural checks and balances in our lakes here in Maine. So those two things combined make them just really formidable in terms of overtaking our aquatic ecosystems. As John mentioned, the plant is native to Europe and parts of the US, but not New England, and is now confirmed in much of the country, but here are the New England states where it is present. I have this video, and I hope this will work for you, but this was taken on Big Lake the day of that we were up there, and you can see what the so you can see what it looks like when you're seeing it through a view scope. And we do have kits for making these view scopes, and I do believe that the Passamaquoddy tribe has received a grant, and they will be making some kits that will be available for people who are conducting surveys up there this year. Here's one more little video clip. The plants here had really come to the surface. Here John is grabbing out a specimen, and you can see that a lot of the submersed leaf is kind of degrading, but the emergent flower stalk is still there. Oops, sorry. And again, to remind you that Maine has 6 lake-friendly native milfoils. This one is the one, the whorled water milfoil is the dead ringer for the variable milfoil. There's also northern, low, Farwell's, an alternate flower. And then we have the 6th native milfoil that just looks like a bunch of little kind of hooked stems that stick up from the bottom. There's no leaves on them at all, but it is a milfoil, not to be confused, of course, with any of the leafy milfoils. There are also some other plants that share common characteristics. We have bladderworts that have somewhat of the bottle brushy look, but if you pull the plant up and look at the leaves, you see they're branch divided, not feather divided. This one has an alternate leaf arrangement. This one has a whorled leaf arrangement like the milfoils, but both of them have a branched leaf arrangement. Bladderworts are cool. They have these little bladderworts attached to some part of the plant. In these two, the bladders are attached to the leaves, and the bladders are little structures for capturing prey. The difference between those two native milfoils can be seen at the tip of the plant, where the common just kind of bunches up, and the large purple bladderwort forms these bird cage-like structures that are really comprised of the leaves in the whorl folded up like an umbrella. And that's the two species side by side. But neither one has a feather-divided leaf, so not a milfoil. Hornworts are another plant that you might find when you're out there looking around. They also have that bottle brushy look to them, but you can just pull it up, take a peek at the leaves, and see that they're fork-divided, not feather-divided. Again, not feather-divided, not a milfoil. The last one I'm going to show you is water marigold. Again, has a very bottle brushy look to it, very much like variable milfoil when you see it through the water. But if you bring the stem up again and take a look, it actually is two. They grow very close to the stem. There's no leaf stem, but two widely branched divided leaves glommed onto the stem. And again, not feather divided leaves, not a milfoil. That feather divided characteristic is really the thing that you're looking for. Just a few words about what I hope that you might become engaged in. It's what we call our invasive plant patrol. And we have hundreds of volunteers across the state partaking in these invasive aquatic plant surveys and finding invasive plants. I should just point out this fellow right at the top here, Dick Butterfield, actually found one of the worst invaders on his lake. His first time out on the water, once he'd attended a course, he found Hydrilla on Damariscotta Lake, and basically single-handedly saved that lake from economic and ecological disaster. So it is working. But doing this in the midst of a global pandemic is proving quite a challenge. The thing that we're not going to be able to do on Big Lake this year, we're very sorry to say, is bring our Uber Ipper team up there. And I want to talk a little bit about these folks. They have been, it's a bunch of people, volunteers that we have trained over the years that really love the work. They're good at it. They have a high level of expertise, as many of them have the expertise of any professional that I know doing this work. And they are ready to be mobilized when the need arises. They spent 5 years, one of these years here, they weren't on the lake, but in this 5-year period, 23 days only on the water, they surveyed the entirety of Moosehead Lake, looking for aquatic invaders, finding none, but documenting over 100 native plant species. We just finished up a 3-year project on the lakes of Mount Desert Island. And again, we had a wonderful team of volunteers. We met in January to start planning the mobilization for Big Lake, and we had a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of great ideas, and the planning was well underway when COVID-19 hit, and that endeavor has been canceled for 2020. We're very sorry to say. But we do hope the DEP and LSM staff, along with our local partners, the tribes, and Downeast Lakes Land Trust and others, to the warden, Brad Richard, hopefully, to survey at least the boat landings that have been identified, both the public and private boat landings, perhaps later in the season. We're hopeful to do that. But in the meantime, we're relying upon all of you who are up there. We're not going to have any live in-person workshops this year, but we will be providing webinars online. And we have kind of chunked our 6-hour IPP 101 certification course into 3 segments. And we will be presenting those both live, and they will be present as recordings on our website, so you can watch them at your leisure. And if you want to become a certified plant patroller, you can take the quiz at the end of each module, and then the part for your certification is to go out on the lake, collect some plants, and then come back and attend one of our live plant ID. That should not be idea. Plant ID Zoom sessions, and we'll give you feedback on the identifications that you've done on those plants. You've determined whether they're suspicious or not. So we have a system in place for doing this, not live. Here is the schedule. It will be on our website soon. So it will all be on www.lakestewardsofmaine.org on the Invasive Plant Patrol Workshop tab. But our first workshop actually is going to be on how to use a survey app to do the survey, to collect your data. That's kind of beyond this first bit of training, but some of our experienced plant patrollers may want to go to an app documentation instead of using our paper survey forms. And anyone who thinks they're really going to get into it, please do attend that, and we'll teach you how to use the app. And then our IPP 101 will start on July 1st. We'll do 2 segments on July 1st, and we'll do the 3rd segment on July 8th. And then you go out and collect some plants, and you could be certified. We're also going to do some, I would say, non-professional GoPro videos that I'm calling Lessons from the Littoral Zone, to provide more tips on how to conduct a thorough, efficient, and effective survey to maximize the amount of territory that you can see, which is going to give you the best assurance that you are ruling out the presence of variable milfoil in the area where you're surveying. So I will give some tips on that in those videos. They'll be on our website. And also, we're going to be doing some advanced plant identification webinars that will also be posted to the website soon. And those are going to focus more on the native plants. We're sure you have a lot of beautiful native plants on Big Lake, and we would love to have them documented. So we'd love to train you how to identify your native plants as well. And then we're also just going to have some TA sessions where we meet with, if you've got some questions, you can have a, what we're calling the IPPer Zoom room Tuesdays at 2 o'clock, where you can reserve a time and come in and ask questions, or just join a general brainstorming session, a question session. And then we've got, again, by appointment, or we're just going to be live as well. What is this plant? So if you find some plants and you just want to know what they are, you can take pictures and bring them to those sessions, and we'll help you identify them. And I'm not going to say much more about that. We're also very soon to launch our app, which is going to have invasive plants, native plants, and also invasive critters and native critters. And we call that the Maine Field Guide to Aquatic Phenomena. It will be in the Google Play Store soon and the Apple Store soon. And it will cover fauna, flora, including higher plants and algae, and other aquatic phenomena that you may encounter on the lake. We're pretty excited about this. You can also search just aquatic invaders. So that's going to be another great way to resource for you when you're going about this work. And the app is great because once you bring up an image, you can zoom in on it just the way you can zoom in on any image on your smartphone or your tablet by pulling it apart with your fingers, and get a kind of a more of a microscopic view of what you're looking at. So to close, this is you, and we are here to support you. That is what we do. That is our work. We are all fired up by the fact that our work is supporting the volunteers who are out there doing all this incredibly important work on our lakes for free of charge, and just offering their services on behalf of all of us. And we couldn't be prouder to support those folks. And so we welcome you to that effort, and we are here to support you. And that is my contact information. That's my direct email address. And we thank you all so much for your interest in helping Big Lake to get through this crisis that it's facing right now in the best shape possible, and then to work to protect it into the future, because there's much to be done to keep it safe into the future. So thank you all again, and I'm going to sign off now, and you can take over, Lillian.
Thank you, Roberta. So, Roberta, I'm going to leave you up on the screen, and I'm going to bring John back in. We had quite a few questions, so I'm going to let you and John kind of... Okay, so our first question was, and John, everyone can see you as well now too. Boat traffic seems to encourage the growth of roots, and suction harvesting seems counterproductive. Can you comment on that?
Whenever any removal effort is done for an invasive aquatic plant, there is fragmentation, and that, I assume that is what the person is referring to. We advise groups that are doing removal with diver-assisted suction harvest, or even just divers removing, that they seek out volunteers to be in kayaks adjacent to their work, and those volunteers are scooping up fragments. Some groups have had a lot of success with recruiting volunteers, others have not. In the big picture, I think that a well-run diver-assisted suction harvest or dive program is productive. There will be fragments that are created, and those fragments could become a new plant. But the really successful programs are those that have people collecting fragments to reduce that likelihood, but also they revisit the areas that they're removing from which they're removing plants. Ideally, twice or even 3 times during a season, they revisit the area. And remember too, these are weeds. What happens in the garden, unless I put down a black plastic mat, I'm going to get weeds coming every year. They will grow back. It is not a one and done situation, no matter what.
Okay, thank you, John. So our next question was, why aren't buoys mandatory, and do certain depths in the lake inhibit the milfoil from growing?
I could talk about buoys, then maybe Roberta can take the second half. There are some buoys that are mandatory. The buoys in the state are under the boating facilities program, I believe I'm trying to remember the proper name. It's in the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. There's a very specific suite of buoys with specific messages on them that have specific meanings. There are some buoys that say, do not go here, prohibited, no access. There are others that say, the stripe buoys, that suggest that you shouldn't go between there and shore because it's probably very shallow and too shallow for your boat. I don't know why the milfoil buoys are advisory. I expect because, on all the lakes, when you're on water bodies, there are very few buoys that say you can't go here. This leads me to another. The question may be, okay, well, why don't we cordon off areas and make them inaccessible to boats? That could happen in certain situations, and in fact, it has happened in certain situations. That would require the commissioners of the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and the Department of Environmental Protection to agree to close off that area of the lake for any boat use. If that is done, it also requires that regulatory markers are placed and monitored, and to be successful, there would need to be an enforcement aspect of that program. So it's not to say that there are no situations where some of these areas should be restricted, but it's something that requires a lot of consideration and careful thought and planning as to how it will be carried out.
Okay, thank you, John.
So we'll talk about the depths.
Yes, so variable milfoil is restricted by depths. All aquatic plants are restricted by depth. Just a little interesting thing about aquatic plants is that many of them, like we all evolved at one point from the sea. We became terrestrial organisms, and then and the same is true with flowering plants. And most of our aquatic plants are flowering plants. But then some aquatic plants evolved back into the water. And the more you could think in a way that the more evolved they are, the deeper they can grow in the water, the less light. It's a matter of how much light is needed for the plant to grow. And those that are really well adapted need less light than those that haven't gone so far out into the water. So all aquatic plants have a range of depths in which they thrive and can survive. Variable milfoil is very comfortable, typically out to about 11 feet of depth, but can go further out if the water is very clear and the sunlight penetration is really good. And just to put that in perspective with Hydrilla, which I mentioned as being the worst of the worst aquatic invader worldwide, perhaps, is that plant can grow easily to 30 feet of depth. We have nothing native to Maine that grows to that depth, rooted aquatic plant. And then it can even grow to greater depths. It's been found up to 50 feet of depth in very clear water. So that's extraordinary. And but variable milfoil, I think if you checked out to 15 feet of depth, if you were able to see out that far, and again, that how clear the water is going to give you a sense of how far out you need to go. The plants can be rooted out in that outside edge where it's very hard for you to see it from the boat. It is possible, but I should say thankfully, it's not really thankfully, variable milfoil grows up to the surface. And even if it's growing at 15 feet of depth where you wouldn't see the bottom, you'll see it because it will be growing up toward you, and it will even be rising almost to the surface. So I hope that answers that.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. So we've already been over an hour, so I'm going to try to kind of consolidate the questions a little bit. So the next question kind of goes with that, is that the hydroelectric use of Big Lake, they pump the water out of the lake, making it drier and shallower during summer when it's dry. Does this fluctuation impact the spread of milfoil?
I'll comment, and then Roberta can also chime in. If the water is lower in the summer, in already shallow areas where plants may be growing, I suppose there is the potential for boat traffic to encounter more plants and fragment more plants. That is one possibility that I can think of. Sometimes water level drawdown is actually used as a technique to attempt to control invasive plants, but that is done in the wintertime when water is drawn down and the lake bottom is exposed and dried. And sometimes, in certain situations, there may be some success in reducing the growth of invasive aquatic plant. Roberta?
And I just add the caveat that that we saw earlier, the terrestrial morph, the variable milfoil. Well, some of our native aquatic plants might find the conditions of that fluctuation difficult to survive in. Some may. Variable milfoil would not find that difficult to survive in because it can even be stranded and just survive. And so, yes, over time, that fluctuation could favor variable milfoil.
Okay. Thank you for that, Roberta and John. So there's a couple other invasive species people were wondering about. Are giant snails, duck itch, or yellow iris a potential problem in Big Lake or in the Grand Lake stream area?
So you all
Yellow
don't have
iris
duck itch there? Is that right? There's no duck,
yellow
no
iris
duck itch on Big Lake? Sorry.
We don't know. I don't know. I assume there is, but yellow iris. I saw the comment about yellow iris. It was somebody on Pennsauken Lake in Norway where they are trying to manage the yellow iris, and I think the specific question was how much they should be concerned or something to that effect. And I've seen yellow iris grow in very dense patches that are monoculture. The patches tend to be. I have not seen it take over a wetland the way purple loosestrife can, but I've seen it grow as densely as purple loosestrife may grow in smaller confined areas. We have been working with the folks at Lakes Association of Norway on that and continue to work with them on that.
Okay. Susie was wondering what the outlook. Go ahead, Roberta.
Sorry, there's a bit of a lag, so I can't tell when you're about to talk. I'm sorry, but just to point out that Chinese mystery snails certainly could be found in Big Lake, and also the yellow iris. If you want to be on the lookout for that, because it is an iris, and most people know what an iris leaf looks like, that long blade. Well, if you see iris blades that overtop your head, they can be very tall, and that would be yellow iris, even if you weren't seeing it in flower. So that's just a tip on how to look for that. If you're seeing a nice short typical iris leaf along the lake shore and you don't see a flower, it's more than likely the blue flag iris.
Okay, so Susie wanted to know what the outlook and plan for the milfoil is. Specifically, is there a plan for eradication of the milfoil on Big Lake?
Well, we can both take a stab at this. I think that based on what I've seen in Big Lake, that eradication of variable milfoil is very unlikely. As hard as that is to say, I think that's reality. Roberta talked a little bit about the survey that was planned. The first thing is to do some of that surveying, not to the extent that she had hoped and we had hoped, but to initially get up and hit some of the important areas like the other boat access sites to see is this invasive plant or any other invasive plant located near the boat access sites, thus presenting a real immediate threat of the plants being moved to other water bodies. That's the real first step. In interest of time, I'll turn it over to Roberta for her thoughts.
I tend to agree with you on the eradication part, John, unfortunately. But yeah, all of our hearts sunk the day that we were there, I have to say. It was really, really hard to see how well established it is there. But keeping it from spreading within the lake and keeping it from spreading to other lakes is our job now. And controlling it to some degree. Keeping it, the best thing that you can do if eradication isn't possible is keeping the contact between the plants and the boats to an absolute minimum. And there's all kinds of ways that can be done, and the infestation can be managed and held in check to a certain degree and removed from certain parts of the lake as well. And the small new pioneer colonies that are popping up could be removed to prevent new big colonies from becoming established. So there is a lot of work that can be done to the benefit of the lake, keeping it in good shape. And to be honest, an invasive plant, if you can keep it in check and make it behave like a native plant, then it's not that much different. In other words, you just will have to intervene on behalf of the lake, and that will require an effort on the part of the lake community. And so that's why we're so glad that you're all on this call, because your help is really going to be needed, and we will, to the degree we can, bring in help from away as well when things are safe for us to do so. We just did not want to come to your part of the state where COVID is quite low incidence, and from a part of the state where it's higher incidence, as well as people coming from out of state who are joining, coming back to their lakes and so on. We just did not want to bring that up north. So but as soon as we can, we will be there to help you. And we are here to help you online at every opportunity. So.
Okay, so last question. Somebody asked how many boat launches there are on Big Lake. There are 3 public boat launches on Big Lake, and then there's a number of private camps as well. And they wanted to know, what can they do to reduce the threat when they're trailering between Big Lake and other lakes in the area like West Grand Lake.
I went up before addressing that. I did notice the comment about a professor at University of Maine, Machias. Thank you to that, from Brandy, for that suggestion to contact them. And I also saw a separate question about, we're here for a couple of weeks, what can we do to help? I would contact Downeast Lakes Land Trust, and also make sure Roberta has your contact information to get trained to have a good eye for these plants. But anybody moving between any water body, certainly between Big and West Grand, but any water body, and it's hard to get it ingrained in you to do it. I've been boating in Maine many years, and it took me a little while to remember, oh, I got to check my boat, is to check the hull, the trailer, where the license plate is, the winch line, anything in the boat. It sounds like a lot, but it can be a pretty quick activity, especially if you know your boat, you know what it looks like, you know what you expect to see. Drain the water after you remove it from Big Lake, or after you remove it from West Grand or any lake. Drain the bilge, pull the plug. Make sure you put it back in before you get to the next lake, but it's important to get that water out of there. And inspect and remove any plant, any piece of material that looks like a little critter of any sort from the trailer, from the boat, from inside the boat. It's a simple exercise, but it has an enormous impact. Anything to add, Roberta?
No, I think you covered it with clean, drain, dry. I wonder, though, actually, John, I know that Mary Jewett from Lakes Environmental Association has created a nice video on how to inspect your boat. Is that appropriate that we could share through Downeast Lakes Land Trust and on their website or their Facebook page, and people could see that and just give them a more visual idea of how to conduct a good inspection?
Yes, I think that I'm sure. I expect we could do that. Karen is listening in. I'm sure she could say for sure, but I believe that's something that we could get out to the website.
Yeah, I will.
And one other thing, Lillian, I see there's a question about a map available showing where the milfoil is. There is the image that I had in my show that came from Joe. From Brad. So that is an image of approximate areas that we know thus far. I don't think I assume Brad wouldn't mind if I shared that with you, Lillian, in case somebody wants to see that.
Yes, and I can also
bear in mind,
cat Brad as well. And those videos that y'all were talking about training how to inspect your boat, I'll get those as well, and they will be posted on our website as well.
Great. And just bear in mind with that map that that's the only part of the lake that we have surveyed. So it certainly could be, it would be wonderful if it was confined to Clifford Bay. That would be best case scenario, but we don't expect that that's so. So just bear that in mind.
We just had one more question. Why are we monitoring at only one public boat ramp if there's 3 on the lake? I don't know if anybody would care to talk about that.
I don't, and I think we probably could get Downeast Lakes Land Trust in on that. I know that we had a call with Downeast Lakes Land Trust and Joe Musante, also from the Passamaquoddies, and we had a discussion about the high use ramps. The idea is to have the most boat inspections at the highest use ramps, and I am not as familiar as you all are with what they are and where they are, but I think that is the calculus that Downeast Lakes Land Trust is going to consider, and where to place inspectors. Roberta, I don't know if you had any other discussions with them on that.
No, that's my understanding. It was to cover the highest use times and areas, which makes sense if you've got.
Yeah, so to speak to that, just so everyone is aware, we do have inspectors at the Grand Lake Stream Greenlaw Chopping boat launch on the weekends. We will have those going throughout the summer. They are not mandatory, they're voluntary inspections. And I just want to reiterate what John and Roberta have said, that you can inspect for yourself. This is not something that, we have to be there to do for you. You can, just go around your boat, look for anything that shouldn't be on there. Make sure that there's no plastic trash. Make sure that there's no plants, no fish that, passed away and somehow got down in your boat. Anything like that, go ahead and get rid of it. And you can do that yourself. If you have any questions about how to do a boat inspection, feel free to call our office anytime, or go to our website and shoot us an email, and we will, respond as quickly as possible. And if you would like to see how to inspect a boat, like I said, we have inspectors there every weekend in the afternoons on Saturdays and Sundays. You can go down to the boat launch and watch them inspect a boat, or bring your boat and they'll help you inspect it one time. And then that way you know how to do it no matter what lake, whether you're going to Big Lake or West Grand or anywhere in the area.
Thanks, Lillian. And I think Dale asked this a couple times, and I just want to say there is not, none of the native milfoils is endemic to Maine. I guess I could have chatted that to him, but thank you for letting me have that last comment to Dale Schultz.
Yeah, sorry about that, Dale. I did not see that comment. I'm glad that John called that one. So thank you again, everyone. We're going to let John and Roberta off here. Thank them so much for their time. And if you have any questions, like I said, you can either email or call the Land Trust, and we can get you in contact with John and Roberta, and we'll be posting the materials that they have available.
May I ask a question before we say goodbye?
Sure.
Do you know how many people were on? Do you know how many people were on the call today, Lillian?
So the highest number we had was 48, but there were people going in and out. So I'm not exactly sure. I'll have to look at it when we get off of here, but at least 48 people.
I'm glad. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for attending. And again, reach out anytime we can be of help.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Bye now. Bye.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. This recording will be on Downeast Lakes Land Trust website, our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, give us a call at 207-796-2100 or shoot us an email at info@downeastlakes.org. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at the boat launch at Greenlaw Chopping or around Big Lake this summer.